Hi, thank you for that introduction. It was absolutely lovely. I'm excited to be here. I saw that we're literally all over the continent, Ethiopia, Zambia, Nigeria, South Africa, and everything in between, even Botswana, which is a big deal because that's where my people are from. And there are only 2 million people in Botswana. So, in terms of population, we're very far and few between. Hopefully, you can see and hear me. But before I begin, I just want to let you know that I really care about this topic. It's a really big challenge in the African continent, and we have a great group of panelists that will be able to answer questions as I'm going through my presentation because I might not have time to get all your questions. So you can write those questions in the chat, and people like MZ and company can definitely answer some of those questions if I can't get to them. And then obviously after my talk, there'll be a panel discussion. So please do stay in here. But I really want to talk about, how systems are designed and how people actually live and work and adapt. And through that, we'll talk about policy, digital transformation, and how that interweaves. So let me share my screen so that we're all on the same page. Can I get a thumbs up if you can see my screen? Okay, so before I begin, let me briefly explain why I care so deeply about this topic. It's because it's the biggest challenge in almost never the technology. It's a gap between how systems are designed and how people actually live, work, and adapt. That gap is created or closed by policy, which is why this conversation matters so much. So I think this is a slide that everyone was like, and then she disappeared. And it's probably because I was talking some wild stuff about Africa. But digital outcomes here are shaped by national governments, regional economic communities, SADC, etc., continental frameworks like the AU that are often shared ambitions, but not always timelines, incentives, or enforcement mechanisms. So, if technology alone transformed economies, the story would be simple. We would point to mobile penetration, to fintech adoption, to innovation hubs, and move on. Over the last decade, sub-Saharan Africa has experienced one of the fastest rates of digital growth globally. So we actually have the numbers to flex, right? Internet usage increased by over 115% between 2016 and 2021. More than 160 million people gained broadband access between 2019 and 2022, and nearly 200 million people began sending and receiving digital payments in less than a decade. This is real progress. It reflects years of work by governments, regulators, developmental institutions, private sector actors, and civil society. But, and there's always a but when you have a nice story, digital growth doesn't automatically equal digital transformation because transformation is not measured by access alone. It's measured by agency, trust, and economic participation. And this is where the story becomes more complex. Despite all this progress, we still see a persistent gap, a gap between coverage and usage. In sub-Sahara alone, over 80% of people live within 3G coverage. More than 60% have access to 4G, yet barely 1 in 5 actively uses mobile internet services. This gap is not explained by technology. It's explained by things like device access, affordability, digital skills, trust in the system, and regulatory design. And I'm actually going to spend a little bit of time around the affordability piece because I have a bone to pick, okay? In many African markets, 1 gigabyte of mobile data can cost between 5 and 10% of average monthly income. In some countries like Botswana, yeah, I said it, it's higher. For a small business owner, someone selling goods, managing supplies, reaching customers, that's not minor expenses. That's a tax on participation. There's no ands, ifs, or buts about it. And when connectivity is expensive, small businesses make rational choices. They stay offline. They limit their digital footprint. They operate in ways that keeps them invisible to the formal economy. This is where policy has real leverage. Spectrum allocation, maybe? Infrastructure share requirements? I don't know. Universal Service Fund development and deployment? Possibly. Tax treatment of device and data? Competition frameworks that prevent monopoly pricing. I have friends in Nigeria who are crying because they say the provider is just eating their money and there's no data to show. Give me a thumbs up if that's true for you. I'm kidding. We might be recording this, so you don't want to get in trouble. But the choice is simple. Do we design markets where connectivity is a privilege or where it's a utility that small businesses can afford and build on? And more importantly, when policy doesn't make that choice or makes it too slowly, people don't wait. Africans are the king and queens of adapting. Okay, we go formal, we'll create another barter system, whatever. We work around the system. And when that happens, governments lose visibility and trust erodes on both sides. This is all happening at the same time as unprecedented global investment in Africa's digital future.
1 minute, I don't know if you're still sharing.
I am.
It's not. Kindly check for us, please.
Can you see my screen?
Okay, yeah, now it's okay.
Okay. So this all happens at the same time as unprecedented global investment in Africa's digital future. At the continental level, so I'm talking about the African Union laid out a clear ambition through digital transformation strategy for Africa. The period is 2020 to 2030. Listen, it's a snooze to read. Dump it into a large language model. Let it summarize it for you. But essentially, it's positioning digitalization as central to the agenda for 2063. Economic inclusion and long-term competitiveness. The World Bank also followed with a digital economy for Africa moonshot. They've committed billions with a B toward digital infrastructure, digital public platforms, and skills development. The European Union, or EU, launched a global gateway investing heavily in connectivity and digital public goods. This matters, guys, because it tells us something important. It tells us that the world no longer sees Africa as a digital backwater, but as a future digital growth engine. But there is something I want to talk about. Investment alone does not create cohesion. And this is where we need to pay attention because something new is happening. Alongside global capital and multilateral programs, we are now seeing African-led infrastructure bets that fundamentally change the conversation. Let's talk about Strive. Through Cassava Technologies, Masiwa has assembled multiple layers of the digital stack, fiber data centers, cloud services into one of the most extensive digital backbones in the continent. Through liquid intelligent technologies, more than 100,000 kilometers of fiber now run across over a dozen African countries, carrying internet traffic between cities, countries, business, hospitals, you name it. And through Africa data centers, critical information for banks, public institutions, and enterprises are now being stored and processed locally rather than automatically. And then let's talk about AI factories. They're planning on building multiple across the country. The idea behind this is not abstract because AI projects in Africa depend on cloud service located in Europe or North America. This is expensive, it's slower, and raises serious concerns around data security and privacy as well as sovereignty. So if we build it locally, we're thinking cheaper, faster, governed closer, and where data is generated. Best part is that it shifts Africa from being primarily a consumer, and let's not play games, we are primarily a consumer. When we talk about AI, we usually talk about the West and the East. I haven't heard an Africa conversation about this in the big stages. So if this happens, we now become a producer and we host some of these digital products, and maybe we're also advancing our own digital capability. And this is important because for policy, infrastructure like this exposes some real fault lines, right? Without alignment, you're going to get infrastructure that scales faster than governments. Without alignment, you're going to get innovation that moves faster than regulation. Without alignment, you're going to get inclusion becomes an afterthought rather than a design principle. So the lesson here is not that Africa lacks ambition. Please, we have ambition for days. We have done so many great things in our continent, even before we had technology. We can't even say that we don't have capital. You can say maybe we don't know how to use money well, but who knows how to use money well? Even the US has trillions of dollars of debt. So listen, people need to work on financial literacy, but that's another conversation. We also have leadership. Yeah, maybe some is better than others, but there are leaders in there, right? We're not like Venezuela where your president just gets captured by the United States and gets sent like to jail, right? So the lesson is that the next phase of digital transformation is no longer about access alone. It's about coordination between national policies and regional integration, public investment and private infrastructure, global partnerships, and African agency. Because the future of digital economy will not be shaped by who invests most. It's going to be looking at who aligns systems, rules, incentives the best. This brings us to the role of policy. So a lot of us think of policy as just rules on paper. Fair. Most of the time it kind of is. And maybe that's what you're not really supposed to feel policy. If it's doing the right thing, you shouldn't feel it. It's a silent architect, specifically for digital outcomes, because it will shape incentives, risk, trust, and who gets to participate. And when policy moves too slowly, innovation doesn't pause, it just goes informal, and we don't want everything to be informal. Another thing I want to touch on is when we do copy paste, okay? You know, Control C, Control V, the shortcut. Several African countries adopt data protection frameworks closely modeled on European standards. The intention can be right, but for small businesses, startups, and informal enterprises, the cost and complexity of compliance becomes a barrier to entry rather than trust. So what that means in simple terms is large, big firms that you all know the names because they're multinationals and they have billions of millions of dollars comply. And then someone like Nono has a small local player thingy, we get pushed out or we decide to stay informal. And in many African markets, early stage fintechs have repeatedly faced licensing, capital, and reporting requirements designed for established banks. Dude, I just started yesterday. I don't have $1 million in my bank account and my dad ain't rich. So let's be real, okay? And the fact is that the result is not safer innovation. It's slower innovation. It's regulatory arbitrage and relocation for more flexible jurisdictions. So that's when you get that mass migration of people moving from your country to another one that has better roses there. And the pattern, we have to recognize it. People are not resisting digital system. They're thinking, hey, I need to earn a living. So I'm going to go informal. I need to move money across borders and not have 50% of it go to fees. I need to provide some identity. And this is tough with identity, especially in the digital economy space, because a lot of countries say, hey, we can't do this unless we all have like one digital thing. I know someone gave me an example that the name on their birth certificate is different from the name on their driver's license, and it's different from the name of like their health, medical, whatnot. And I'm just like, how is that possible? But it is possible, and it happens. So if millions of people lack formal identification across digital services, then paperwork simply becomes an inhibitor of getting access. It slows down the whole process. And in some spaces, I believe it's intentional. Because if you digitize some processes, that provides visibility. And if you now provide visibility, how am I going to do my corrupt thing where I say, hey, just give me another, something small, and I'll make sure that your paperwork goes through quick, right? So some of it is organic, but we have to be realistic that some of it is actually designed. And this is why policy matters, because policy decides whether digital transformation becomes a ladder, something people can climb into opportunity, or a wall, something they are forced to work around. So let's look at the number of African data centers. This is something that's important because Africa accounts for less than 1% of the global data center capacity, yet we hold 20% of the global population. This is a significant disparity that creates several challenges. If this data is primarily processed and stored outside the continent, it means economic leakage. The value generated by data isn't retained within Africa's economies. Latency issues, accessing data from a distant service slows down digital services and innovation. What I mean is if you click on a button on your phone in an app and it reacts as soon as you click, that's great. If you click on it and it goes and then reacts, that pause, that's a latency. And then we have data sovereignty. This highlights urgent need, like what the guys are doing at Cassava Innovation Technologies, right, to impact and invest locally. Now, if this is the first time you're hearing data sovereignty, let me explain why this matters. And if that's the only thing that you get from my presentation, that's okay. Because data sovereignty is it's not simply just about, power. It's actually what happens when something goes wrong. When data is stored outside a country or a region, decisions about access, security, pricing, and even legal responsibility are often made somewhere else. Under laws your regulators did not even write. And in courts, your citizens cannot easily reach. And in languages, sometimes you cannot even read. This matters because data is no longer just information. It's money, it's identity, it's health records, it's your credit history, it's national infrastructure. When a payment system fails, when personal data is breached, when a public digital service goes down, the question is not only what happened, but who is accountable and which rules apply. If the data lives elsewhere, accountability becomes slower, more complex, and weaker. This is why data sovereignty is not about closing borders or rejecting global technology. It's about ensuring that as Africa becomes more digital, it does not also become more dependent, exposed, or invisible in decisions that affect her people. And this is where policy matters most. Because without regional coordination, without shared standards, interoperable rules, and aligned governance, we don't build digital markets. We build digital islands ripe for digital colonization. So 3 principles that I want to leave you with today. 1, policy must move at the speed of behavior. If people are already doing a digital policy late, then it's late. Okay, your policy is behind. 2, if trust is infrastructure, without trust, adoption does not happen. So no matter how advanced your technology is, you need to understand that trust is your infrastructure. And inclusion needs to be designed, not hoped for. If women, youth, and small businesses are excluded, you must see this as a system failure. These principles apply whether you are drafting regulation, building these cool, fancy platforms that we're all going to use, or teaching skills, or investing in infrastructure. So, as you engage in conversations that follow throughout this conference tomorrow and so on, I invite you to keep one question with you. Not, is this innovative, or not, is this digital, but what policies are quietly shaping whether this succeeds or fails? Because the future of digital transformation in Africa is not decided by technology alone. It will be decided by how well our policies reflect our people and how courageously we design systems, incentives, and trust. Thank you.